Welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. And in this section we're going to be covering our auto design wizards and also our magic wand and redwork tools. So FTCU has four main automatic designing wizards and they're located right here under the wizards hat. So when you click it, you're going to get a little drop-down box and you'll see the four wizards here. The first one is the cross-stitch wizard, which creates automatic cross-stitch patterns out of images. The next one is our photo stitch wizard, which can take a photograph and make a semi-realistic version of it using thread. And we have our auto artwork wizard, which takes in JPEG, raster style images, TIFFs, etc., and turns them into vector artwork. And the goal with that is usually that then you're going to assign your stitches to it manually yourself. And then we have our full auto digitizing wizard, which is the next step to the auto artwork wizard. So it also takes a raster image file, converts it into vectors, and then automatically assigns the stitches to it. So you can use any or all of these wizards, and we're going to show you how to use each one. We also, in this section, are going to cover this tool right here, which is our magic wand, and this tool right here, which is our redwork tool. So let's start out with the cross-stitch wizard. I'm going to go ahead and click it, and it's going to bring up our wizard dialog. And the first thing it wants to do is have us select an image to work with. And you do that by clicking this button here. If you have a Twain compatible scanner, you can click acquire and it will go right to your scanner interface. But we're just going to use an image. So I'm going to click select an image. Now for this example, I'm going to use this picture of a house here that I found somewhere on the internet. And it is not included with your software, but this really shows off the cross-stitch capability. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. I'm going to click open, and then I'm going to click next. And the first thing it wants me to do is resize this, or I can also crop it by pulling these bars in. So if I don't want this extra area up here, I can do that. I'm going to leave it all at the default settings here. If I wanted to scale it, I could. This button lets us reset the size if we didn't do it correctly. And right here, we can select the number of cross stitches per inch, and 10 is the minimum, and I like to have it nice and tight like that. So I'm going to leave it at 10, but if you wanted to make it bigger, you could. This is the number of repeats. Now what this controls is the number of times it goes back over that same cross stitch pattern to give you a thicker thread look. And we can go ahead and leave it at the default of 2. You can change it 0 through 4. We'll go ahead and leave it at 2. And then we have an overlap control that controls how many cross stitches get overlapped in the same area. You can also transform this here, but we are going to leave this all alone, and I'm going to click next. And again, this is a raster image, and then this is the colors that it's going to use. So we call this the color reduction screen. If I want fewer colors, I can actually click a color and click delete, or I could actually just change the number of colors either up or down, and the software would automatically find the colors that made the most sense to delete. So for example, if I wanted these two greens to be the same green, I could delete number 8. But I'm going to go ahead and leave this alone, and I'm going to go ahead and click next. And there's, you can zoom in here and you can select colors and other things with this, and you can preview what it's going to look like once you have deleted those colors, but I'm just going to leave it alone. So I'm going to go ahead and click next, and then this next screen shows us our grid and how it's actually going to divide this up into the cross stitch pattern. And it also allows me to change the background color. So right now the background color is this white, and it's showing me white here, and it's making a guess at the background color, and it happens to have guessed correctly, and I do not want to put stitches in here, so I am not going to check this box. I'm going to leave this unchecked. If I did want to stitch in the background, I would check this. And if it guessed the wrong background color, that's what this little eyedropper is for. I could actually come over here and select the proper color and then tell it to eliminate or fill those stitches. All right, so the next screen is going to be our last screen, or pretty close to our last screen, and this allows us to apply some outline cross stitches to certain areas, and I can select all of them with this button. I can unselect all of them with this button. I can select individually which colors I want to apply a background stitch to, or excuse me, a outline stitch to around. So it's going to give us an extra outline, and I'm not going to do that because I don't want that particular look, but if you want that, you can play with that. So I'm just going to leave all of that alone, and I'm going to click next. And finally here it's going to show us what our cross stitch pattern is going to look like, and that looks pretty nice. And this background color here, this just allows us to change in this preview what the background color looks like. So if you wanted to see it with a yellow fabric, for example, you could come in here. Well, yellow is probably not a good color. Let me go blue. I'll click a blue, and you can just see what it looks like on blue, so you can get an idea what it's going to look like on your fabric if you're going to stitch this out on a fabric color. It won't really affect anything in the actual stitches. It's just for this preview. So now I'm going to click finish, and when I do that, this design is going to come in and it's all selected, so it looks all blue. But if I click off it, you can see that design. Now I'm in 3D and it's a little hard to see here, so I'm actually going to zoom out. I did that with my mouse wheel so you can see it a little bit better. And what I'm going to do right now is I am going to overlay a picture of an actual stitch out of this image so you can see it. So I've got it overlaid now, and you can see that the actual stitch out looks a whole heck of a lot better than the preview, because that's just the way the cross stitch preview is because of all the air in it. And you'll always want to do a trial stitch out to make sure it looks exactly the way you want. So that is the cross stitch wizard. I'm actually going to select this entire image now, and I'm going to delete it. And before I do that, I should just mention, let me click off it, that of course all the elements over here are individually editable, but you need to be careful when you do that. Probably all you'd want to do is adjust the color. If you need to move stitches around and things, it's better to start with new artwork. And one last note about the cross stitch wizard is that when you have a design that has a lot of detail, remember that you are basically using about 1/10 of an inch, so 10 crosses per inch is the maximum amount of detail you could get. So the more detail in your image, the less happy you're going to be with the cross stitch result. So you want to try and pick an image to work with that's not very detailed, that has big areas of color and not a lot of very fine lines. So that again is the cross stitch wizard. Let me go ahead and delete this, and we'll move on to our next wizard. And that next wizard is our photo stitch wizard, and we get to it by clicking our wizard's hat, coming to our second icon, which is the photo stitch wizard, clicking it, and our photo stitch wizard dialog will open up. Like the other wizards, the first thing it wants us to do is select an image. Now before I select an image, let's just talk about appropriate or inappropriate images for this photo stitch wizard. One of the problems with photo stitching is that when we take a picture of something, like for example a baby like this, we usually don't have a nice black or white background around it. We usually have real stuff that's around the baby, like maybe stuff in your kitchen or your living room or the toys or something. And generally we're not real interested in stitching all of that stuff out. What we want is just, say, the head of the baby, or if it was a dog, just the head of our dog. So you're going to want to get familiar with some kind of an external image editing program to try and remove that background as much as possible. Ideally, you want a white or solid color background, with white being preferred. And that way, when you do your photo stitch, you're just going to see the object that you are interested in. Because when we look at a picture of a dog or a baby or something, our eyes tend to automatically ignore the background. The computer can't do that. It's going to try and make stitches for all of the things that are in the image. So I'm going to go ahead and click Select Image, and you'll see that this picture of a baby here that I'm going to use, it is already got the background removed. So I've gone in with an image editing program and taken out the background and made it white. And I'm going to go ahead and click Open and Next. And here we can resize this to the size that we want. So this is about 4 inches wide and a little bit less than that tall. I could transform it if I want. I could crop it by moving these cropping bars. I could edit the image by going to whatever my image editing program in Windows is, transform it, etc., reset the size if I didn't like my new size. I'm just going to go ahead and click Next, and this is going to give us our options of how it wants to assign the stitches here, and actually this is where we're going to generate the stitches. So first of all, there's 2 different types of stitch types we can do. We can either do this as a black and white or basically grayscale image, or if we click the down arrow we can select color. So I'm going to go ahead and select color, and then the next thing it wants us to pick is a pattern size. So what the software is going to do is it's going to try and create shades of color by making essentially little blocks or areas of color, and this pattern size will affect the amount of detail that we get. But it's also going to make the stitch count go up or down. So while it might be tempting to make the pattern size very small, and again you probably don't want to go below 1.5 millimeters, you will see that it affects the stitch count. So let's just leave it at 3, and I'm going to click this Generate Stitches button, and you'll see that the stitch count comes in here. So when I click Generate Stitches, you'll see this little preview here. Now I'm going to be honest with you and tell you this looks terrible. It always does, don't worry about that. But you'll see here I've got 6,773 stitches. If I change my pattern size to 2, not 22, okay, and I click Generate Stitches, you'll see I have a lot better detail over here, but I've basically tripled my stitch count up to 15,226 stitches. So if I want to leave that there, I will. So let's just go ahead and leave it there, and we'll go ahead and click Finish, and it's going to bring in that image. If I click off it, you can see it, and I'm in 3D mode, and boy, that looks pretty awful. All right, that's just the way these things look in stitch preview mode in the software. If I zoom back out, you'll start to see that it starts to look a little bit better, and there you can see some detail, but it looks an awful filled in there. So I'm just going to be honest with you again and tell you that no matter what you do, this preview is going to look awful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to overlay in an actual stitch out of this, and I think in my stitch out I used a 3 millimeter pattern size, not 2, so it won't be quite as detailed as this, but you'll be able to see a little bit better what it looks like. But no matter what you do with this photo stitch wizard, it's never going to look great close up. You're going to have to get away from it quite a bit to see what it looks like and have it resolve itself into an image. And the reason that that's the case is that the way a CMYK image works, and if you're not aware of it, CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which are the colors we use when we print things with a printer, or you see things printed like a magazine or a book and something. Those inks combine to create all the possible shades of color. And those inks, when we print with them, they're transparent. Thread is not transparent, so the way that the photo stitch works is it puts the various colors next to each other, and then in order to blend them like it would happen if they were transparent, you have to get far enough away from it so your eye can do the blending. And that is how the photo stitch mechanics work. So that is the photo stitch wizard. Feel free to play with that and make whatever photos you want. Just remember that you're going to get better results if you try and remove the background before you start. So we'll go ahead and delete our photo stitch here. I'm just selecting all items, pressing my delete key. I'm going back to my photo stitch wizard because we're going to talk about the auto artwork wizard now. And I'm going to go ahead and click that to bring it up. And you'll see pretty much the same dialog here. Again, it wants us to select an image, so I'm going to click that. I'm going to use this simple butterfly for this example. So I'm going to go ahead and select that butterfly. Again, what it wants here is a raster style image, so that's your JPEG, TIFF, PNG, etc. And I'm going to click Open and Next. And the first thing it wants us to do is to resize this image. And we can make it bigger, smaller, whatever we want to do with it. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at this size. It's going to be in millimeters. So this is a little bit under 2 inches high, about 1.5 inches, something like that. So we'll just go ahead and leave this as a little tiny butterfly here. And I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And this is what we call the color reduction screen. So this is basically the same type of screen that we saw in our cross-stitch wizard. And it's going to show us the colors that it expects to use in the design. And again, I can change it. This one's only got 2 colors plus the background, so we're going to go ahead and leave it alone, and I'm going to click Next. Again, this shows us what it's going to actually trace around and stitch out. So this is what we call our vectorizing screen or vectorized image. So this is showing us the outlines. So you're actually seeing a little preview of the actual vector here, that it's taken that image and traced around the areas of color and turned it into our vectors. Now, if I like the way this looks, I can go ahead and just click Next. If I don't think it did a very good job tracing and I want it to trace a little bit tighter, I can move this tolerance slider to less tolerance, meaning it will trace better, or I can move it out to more tolerance, which means it'll trace looser. So you can play with that, but I have found that this default of 15, and you can also change it numerically here, same thing. I've found that this default of 15 works pretty good in almost every single case. So I never, ever, hardly ever reduce or change this value. But if you do and you want to preview it, once you've changed it, you'll need to click this Update Outlines button to see the new preview here. And then, like in our cross-stitch wizard, this allows us to decide what the background color is. This is what it's guessed the background color is. We can select a different color if it guessed wrong, and whether or not we want to put stitches in there or not. Now, typically we don't, but if you want to, you can. So I'm going to leave this unchecked, and I'm going to click Finish. Now, I said put stitches in. I actually misspoke. Actually make a vector outline of the white, and we don't want to do that, so I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to click Finish, and it is going to bring in our vectorized design. So if we look over here in our sequence view, we'll see that we actually have 3 items. So we have one artwork item here that is the black body and the antenna, and we also have 2 different wings here for the artwork. And these again are not stitches. They come in automatically filled in the approximately the same color as our image. It tries to match the color. If you want, of course, you can change those colors. You'll notice, however, that I have no colors at all in my design colors because these are not stitches yet. But the next thing we probably want to do is convert these into stitches. So how would we do that? Well, we're going to use our 1 clicks to do that. And we're going to start out with the black. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it actually made it dark navy, which looks pretty black on my screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it alone. If you wanted to change it to black, you could. But I'm going to try and determine what type of stitch I want to put in here. The way I'll do that is with my ruler tool. We've looked at the ruler a lot, but I'm going to explain it a little bit better. The main thing that this ruler does for us is tell us what type of stitch we want. So before I do any of this, it's important that we get this to be the exact size that we want it to stitch out. Now, because it's a vector, we can resize this anywhere we want and it will still look fine. We could have resized it on the image coming in, or we can resize it now as a vector. So either way you do it is fine. But we're going to go ahead and leave it alone. But because we're going to assign stitches based on the size of the elements, we want to make sure that these are correct, because if we have the wrong dimensions here, we'll assign potentially the wrong type of stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and click my ruler tool, And if I measure across something, it's going to give me the measurement in inches. And when I'm looking at stitches, I want to be in millimeters. So I'm going to right click here and change my measurement system into metric. Now when I measure across something, it's going to give me a metric measurement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure across the widest part of this black element here to see what type of stitch I want to put in there. So let me measure across the widest part here. And it says it's 6.4 millimeters, and it's telling me tip, use a satin. And the way I'm measuring is I'm clicking and dragging, and when I let off the mouse, which is right now, you'll see that that goes away. So we're going to go ahead and use a satin stitch here. And while we're here, let's just measure across the widest part of the wing here. And I know just from experience that this is going to be too wide for a satin. It's going to be a fill, and you probably have already figured that out too. But let's just take a look and see what the ruler says. And it says, yes, use a fill stitch. All right, so we are going to now put some stitches in here. So I'm going to go back to my normal select mode. I've got this body selected. I'm going to use my auto satin right here, my one-click auto satin, to put in satin stitches. So it's now going to put in satin stitches in that area. And I'm going to click this fill over here, or this artwork over here. I'm going to hold down Control and select this one because I'm going to apply a fill stitch to both of those. And I'm going to do that with my fill right here, my standard fill. So I'm going to put that in, and I'm going to click off it so we can see what our design looks like. And if I zoom out to where you could see about the actual size, you'll see that that's going to stitch out pretty well. The only thing that I notice here is that my wings are on top of the body, and I probably want it the other way around. And so all I'm going to do is take my wings and push them up to the top here in my sequence view, let off my mouse, and they will stitch first now, and the body will be on top. So that is how you use the Auto Artwork Wizard. Again, in a nutshell, what it does is it takes a raster image, traces around the areas of color, and gives you a vector that you can then assign stitches to any way you want. And of course, since it's a vector, you know how to use the shape tool to modify that shape should you need to do that. So I'm going to delete this butterfly here. I'm going to select all items, press the delete key on the keyboard. Our next wizard is going to be our auto digitizing wizard. And again, what this is going to do is it's going to ask us to select an image. So I'm going to click here, select image, and this time I'm going to use one of the built-in images. And I'm just going to use this dog here. And we're going to go ahead and click open, and we're going to click next. And this is very important now. When we were using the Auto Artwork Wizard, not so important to scale your image in the beginning because what you're going to get is vectors, and you could rescale it in the software and it would still come out very nice. But the Auto Digitizing Wizard is actually going to assign stitches. And unless we have our proper size here to begin with, the stitches that it's going to assign will be incorrect. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our image size here is the size that we want to stitch it out approximately. So this is about 2 inches. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it about 4 inches high, which is about 100 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you'll see that when I change the height, the width changes automatically. And I'm going to click next. And here again is my color reduction screen. Again, I can individually delete colors or change them here. I can show, hide the preview. I can edit the image and zoom in and out. And I'm going to go ahead and click next. So you could change anything here, but I'm not going to. I'm going to click next. And this is, again, our vectorizing screen. This is just like the one we just looked at. Again, you can change the way it does the outlines here by changing this tolerance value. If you do that, don't forget to click Update Outline so you can see your results. Again, this is very important. This is guessing that white is the background color, which it is. We do not want to fill the background color with stitches normally, but what I see in this image is that there's some little white bits in here, all right? And I want to make those into stitches because there are little highlights on top of the eyes. So if I tell it not to use the white, what it's going to do is it's not going to fill stitches in here, and it's also not going to fill stitches in here. It won't put any in here either, but I'm going to show you that it's easy to delete them because I want these to come out. So I'm just going to go ahead and let it, this time, fill the area with stitches. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to click Next. And this last screen, this is a new one. We haven't seen this one before. This is what we call the judgment screen. It's just making some judgments about how we want things to be when it assigns stitches, whether we want to minimize the number of color changes in our sequencing or minimize the jumps. So you can choose either one of those. And with lock stitches, you have a choice of never putting them in, always putting them in, or only around the trims. I'm going to leave it to the default of always. And trims, again, will determine whether it never puts in a trim command, it always puts in a trim command every time it wants to do a jump stitch, basically, or trim at a certain number of millimeters. Now, like we have discussed before, most of your home machines are going to ignore all this information. If you have a multi-needle, it's going to respect this, but most of your home machines will ignore this, so generally it doesn't matter at all what you do here. And I'm just going to click Finish, and when I do that, you will see that the image comes in, and I'm going to click off it so you can see it. And you can see here that it has put in all of my background stitches, and what I'm going to do is click my sequence view, which is the white, and I'm actually just going to click out here because I know that's one big area, and I'm just going to press the delete key to delete those stitches. I'm going to do that here, delete those. I'm going to delete these up here. And lastly, I'm going to delete this little bit of white in here. Oh, I got one more area down here that I want to delete. So I'm deleting all of those, but I'm leaving my little white highlights in here. All right, so that is, I can see I've got just a little bit left of white right here, and I'm going to just delete that. All right, so now I've just got my white highlights in here, which is what I want. You can see that it did a pretty good job of digitizing this dog. The only thing that I notice about this is that my black of my eyes and my nose and the little bit of the mouth here, they are behind this fill, and I want them to be above the fill, but I don't want them to be above my little white highlights here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this one. Remember, if I drag it to here, it will fall in below it. So I'm going to drag it right to there and let off the mouse, and it comes in below it. And now if I look at my stitch out, it looks a whole heck of a lot better. So that is the auto digitizing wizard. Works really, really well, and you can use it to take any image and convert it into stitches. So I'm just going to give you one more tip about this, and that is when you use an image with this, you want to try and use an image that has areas of solid color, like a piece of clip art like we did here. You don't want to try and do it with a photograph, because if you do that, you are not going to get the results that you expect, because photographs use lots of variations in color, and thread doesn't do that. So thread is big solid areas of color, so auto digitizer works best with images like that. Now, one last thing I want to talk about, and this relates to both the auto digitizing wizard and the auto artwork wizard, is the way it handles compensation and overlapping areas so that things don't pull apart. In the auto artwork wizard, it's going to trace the areas of the image exactly and give you those exact vectors. And when you apply stitches to them, they are going to butt up to each other if there are areas that do that. There's not going to be any overlap built in. However, the auto digitizing wizard does apply areas of overlap and some push and pull compensation for you automatically. So let's take a look at that in this dog here. If I turn off 3D and we are to zoom into an area, let's just zoom in right to here, you'll see that these brown stitches, I'm going to go back to a pointer here, these brown stitches are overlapping this fill, so that when the stitch is out, when these pull in, they will line up perfectly. So in other words, we have put in push and pull compensation and overlapping areas automatically for you in this image of the dog. whereas that will not happen in the Auto Artwork Wizard. So why is that important? Well, if you stitch something out from the Auto Artwork Wizard, if you just fill areas or put stitches into those areas, chances are you're going to get gaps and misalignment. So you'll definitely want to run it through Save to Sew when you use that wizard. This one, you might want to run it through Save to Sew. You don't necessarily have to because we've already compensated, but it's probably a good idea to adjust the density and other things for the fabric because it's going to put in defaults, underlay and things like that. But it's already got some overlap. So when you get to Save to Sew, if you have used the Auto Artwork Wizard and assigned stitches, you want to choose the I digitized section of each fabric when you're using Auto Artwork. When you're using Auto Digitizing, that's already had some compensation built in, so you want to choose I didn't digitize. One more time, if you're using the Auto Artwork Wizard, when you get to Save to Sew, your choice wants to be I digitized. If you're using the Auto Digitizing Wizard, when you get to Save to Sew, your choice wants to be I didn't digitize. So that wraps up our Auto Wizards, and we are going to move on now to our Magic Wand and our Redwork tools. Now, both of these work on an image, but unlike our wizard, they work on an image that is a backdrop. So I'm going to get a new design window here, and we're going to load in a backdrop to work with, and we're going to use our backdrop tool to do that. And we're going to choose this balloon here, and we're going to click Open, and it's going to come in. Now, what's important here is that we resize this to the size of the stitches that we want, because if we don't do that, this is going to come out wrong, okay? Because we are going to assign stitches to this just like our Auto Digitizer based on the size of the elements. If this is not the right size, we will assign the wrong stitch elements to it. So when I bring this in, and we've covered this before, and when we talked about how to use images in the software, here are our width and height controls. So it's about 4 inches high and about, 1 3/4 inches wide, something like that. So we'll go ahead and leave this alone, but I'm going to double click to zoom into it. So we are now going to use our Magic Wand. So what the Magic Wand does, and it's right here, and you'll notice that it's lit up now because I have a backdrop in there. If I didn't have a backdrop, this wouldn't be lit up. What this does is this works kind of like the Auto Artwork Wizard, except it works an area at a time. All right, so wherever I click this Magic Wand inside an area, it is going to outline that area for us and give us an artwork piece that represents that outline. So it's like the Auto Artwork Wizard, but instead of working on the whole image at the same time, it works on the various parts of it. So I'm going to go ahead and click in here in the pink, and it's going to give us an outline, and it's going to put it in a color, and it happens to do this deep ocean. And I can see here that I've got that outline. If I hide my backdrop, you'll see I've got the outline of the body of the balloon. Now I also want to do this string here on the bottom. Now, one of the things that you got to remember about the Magic Wand is that the Magic Wand traces the edges of something. So if I click this, what I'm going to end up with, if I again turn off my backdrop, you'll see that I have an outline of that string. Now that may be what I want, and it may not be what I want. Because what I want to do is I want to assign stitches to this, and I'm going to get my ruler, and let's just see what kind of stitch it tells me I need to use here. So here's a nice thick part. Let's measure across that, and that's 1.6 millimeters. That's probably right at about the minimum that I want a satin stitch to be. Up here, it's very, very, very tight, and it's telling me I need to use a run stitch. So what should I do for this? If I put an auto satin in here, it's going to make a very, very tight satin in here, and it's not going to stitch out well. If I were to select that and apply a run stitch to it, it's actually going to work, but it's going to give me a run stitch outline. If I turn on 3D, you'll see that it gives me that look. Now, if that's what I wanted, that's okay, but it's probably not what I really wanted. So I'm actually going to go and delete this. So I'm going to select that run, and that artwork underneath it is gone now. So I'm actually going to delete that. We'll come back to what to do with that in a second. But I want to fill in this balloon here. So again, I'm going to get my ruler. I'm going to measure across the thickest part to see what I can put in here. And I know it's going to be a fill. So yes, it tells me to use a fill stitch. So I will come select my normal select tool. I will click my standard fill to put in a standard fill there, and I can leave it the blue color. I could put in one of these variegated colors, and this is new in the software. We just added this variegated colors, so we could put that in, or I could search and put in a red or a magenta. So let's do that. Let me just put in red and click find. And there's some reds. Let's put in this Lafayette Rose here. I like that color. And so now my body of my balloon is the correct color, but I still need to work on the string. So that is the magic wand tool. And remember that it's going to outline areas of a backdrop image. So remember, it's an outline. Now let's turn our backdrop back on so we can see that string again. And this is where we get to the next tool, which is our red work tool. Instead of using a outside like the magic wand does, the red work tool is going to find the center between the edges and put a stitch in there. Again, a difference between these two: this is going to do the outside, this is going to find the center line between the outside edges, and this one puts in artwork. This is going to put in an actual red work stitch. So it's going to put in a stitch. Now, if we don't want a stitch, we could turn it into anything else we want, because that's just the way the software works. So let's just go ahead and click it, and we're going to come down to this area and click in the black, and you'll see that it put in a red line here. And if I want that look, I can use it. I can select it. If I want to change it to black, I can. So let's just find black here. I know it's number 900. So we'll go ahead and click that, and we'll click find, and I'll assign that color to it. And if I turn off my backdrop, you'll see that I've got a nice string now. Now maybe I want a thicker look. So if I wanted a thicker look, I could assign a steel stitch to this. And when I do that, now I can control my satin width. So let me put a steel in here, and maybe that's a little bit wide. Let's make it, well, let's make it 2 millimeters and click apply. And you can see that it didn't quite touch up here. Easy to fix. I'll just select it. I'll go to shape mode. I will right click to say edit the outlines, and what that does is it hides all of my start and stop points, and I'm just going to take this point and move it up into here, right click, and now I've extended my stitch. I'll go back to normal select mode. I'll click off it so you can see we've got that look, and then maybe I want to put the balloon on top or not. But anyway, that is how we would use both the magic wand and the red work tools. And that completes our section on our automatic digitizing and design tools. So again, to recap, we've got our wizards here. We've got our cross stitch wizard, our photo stitch wizard, our auto artwork wizard, auto digitizing wizard, and lastly over here, our magic wand and our red work tools.